My name is Naomi. I'm 31 years old, and I was sitting on the front curb of my mother's house with 2 bags beside me when the black car turned onto the street. The door behind me was still open. My mother's voice moved through the house the way it moved when a decision had been made and the only remaining work was administrative. My sister's laugh came through the same open door, the particular laugh Dana produced when something had resolved in the direction she had been engineering it toward, and she was permitting herself the small private satisfaction of that. I had been told to pack my things 40 minutes earlier. No explanation attached to the instruction, no conversation preceding it. Just the words, delivered in the tone my mother used for things that were already finished, and then the expectation of compliance. I had packed 2 bags. I had not argued. People who know me well would not find that surprising. People who don't know me sometimes interpret it as passivity. It is not passivity. It is the specific decision of someone who understands that argument in a system built around narrative control does not change the outcome. It only gives the people controlling the narrative more material to work with. I didn't fight it. That would have made it easier for them. So I packed. I came outside. I sat on the curb in the low afternoon light and I let the situation be exactly what it was while I worked on understanding what it actually was underneath what it appeared to be. The black car slowed. It did not cruise past the way a car cruises past when it is moving through a neighborhood with no particular destination. It slowed with the specific deceleration of a vehicle whose driver knows the address and is confirming the number before stopping. It stopped directly in front of me. Before I tell you what happened when that door opened, I need to give you the ground beneath this moment, because what happened on that curb did not begin with a packed bag or an instruction, or even with the 3 days that preceded it. It began earlier than that, and understanding it requires starting from the right place. Before I go back, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and your local time. I want to know who is sitting with me tonight. Now let me take you back. I grew up in a household that ran on 2 separate operating systems. The one visible to the outside world was warm, functional, capable of producing the right impression in the right rooms at the right moments. The one that operated internally was something I spent most of my childhood learning to read without letting on that I was reading it. My mother, Vivian, is 63. She married Gerald when I was 14. Gerald is a man who built a successful commercial real estate firm over 3 decades, sold it quietly 11 years ago, and has since occupied the particular low-profile existence of someone who has enough that visibility offers more risk than benefit. He is the financial center of the household in a way that has never been stated directly, but has never needed to be. My sister Dana is 4 years younger than me. She is my mother's daughter in the way that some children are a parent's daughter, not just biologically but structurally, woven into the way my mother understood herself and her life and what family was supposed to produce. I was always adjacent to that structure rather than inside it. This is not a complaint. It is an observation, the kind I have been making since I was old enough to have the perspective to make it. I was not unloved. I was not treated cruelly. I was managed, maintained at a particular distance that allowed my mother to include me when inclusion served the picture and exclude me when it didn't. I work in forensic accounting. I examine financial records and locate the places where what the documents show and what actually happened have separated from each other. I chose this professionally because I had been doing a version of it personally since I was approximately 11 years old. My mother finds my profession unsettling in a way she has never articulated directly, but which I can read in the specific pause she produces when it comes up in conversation. I had been staying at the house for 3 weeks before the morning of the curb. The reason was practical, a sublease ending before a new lease began. My mother offered the guest room with the warmth she used when she needed something from me, which has always been slightly different from the warmth she used when she didn't. The distinction is subtle. I have been calibrated to it for long enough that it requires no conscious effort to detect. The something she needed was not immediately apparent. What was apparent within the first 48 hours was that the house had a tension in it that predated my arrival. Gerald and my mother were operating with the careful surface politeness of two people who have had a disagreement significant enough that they have decided not to have it in front of anyone. Dana was present more than her schedule normally explained, which was itself a data point. Dana has her own apartment 20 minutes away. When she appears at the family house with the frequency of someone who lives there, it is because she has been asked to appear. I noted all of this. I said nothing. I cooked twice. I helped with an errand. I took up exactly the amount of space the guest room offered and not 1 inch more. And I paid attention to the financial texture of the house in the way I pay attention to financial textures professionally, not invasively, but with the ambient awareness of someone whose training makes certain things visible that are simply not visible to others. The mail that arrived and was immediately taken to Gerald's office without being opened in the common areas of the house. The phone call my mother ended when I came into the kitchen with the specific body language of someone ending a call rather than pausing it. The folder that appeared on the dining room table one morning, thick, tabbed, the kind a professional prepares for a meeting, and was gone by afternoon with no explanation of where it had gone or what it contained. Individual details. Together, a direction. Gerald had been described as out of town for the 4 days preceding my removal. I say described because the description and the evidence did not align in the specific way that misalignments present themselves in my professional work. Not dramatically. Just the small friction between what a record says and what the surrounding data supports. His car had been absent. That part was consistent. But the garage door had operated at 11:41 on Tuesday night. I know the time because the sound pulled me from sleep and I looked at my phone before I registered what I was hearing, and it closed again within 4 minutes. 4 minutes is not the duration of an arrival from a trip. It is the duration of someone retrieving something, or placing something, or confirming something, and leaving without wanting the duration of their presence to be noticed. I lay in the guest room after the garage door closed and I thought about the folder on the dining room table, the one that had been there in the morning and gone by afternoon. The next morning, nothing about Gerald's absence was mentioned. My mother made coffee. Dana arrived at 8:30, which was earlier than her previous pattern of arrival. The two of them had a conversation in the kitchen that ended when I came downstairs. I made my coffee. I ate breakfast. I watched my sister's eyes track me across the kitchen with the specific attention of someone monitoring a variable in a situation they are managing. That was Wednesday. Thursday passed with the particular controlled normalcy of a household in which everyone is performing normalcy. Friday morning, my mother told me to pack my things. The speed of it was the thing that confirmed what the other details had been suggesting. 11 minutes from instruction to bags on the curb. I have thought about that number many times since. 11 minutes is not the pace of a spontaneous decision. 11 minutes is the pace of a plan that has already accounted for resistance and has been designed to move faster than resistance can organize itself. Dana had positioned herself in the living room before my mother said anything, not obviously. Just present in the way that a witness positions themselves before the moment they are there to witness. I notice this only in retrospect, the way you notice staging after the performance has already begun. My mother's instruction was 7 words. No explanation followed. When I looked at her with the question that those 7 words created, she held eye contact with the specific steadiness of someone who has rehearsed the moment and is executing it correctly. I went upstairs. I packed 2 bags. The selection of 2 bags was its own small decision. I did not know how long I would be outside, or where I would go from the curb, or what the situation would require. 2 bags was the number that felt honest to my uncertainty without being either too little or too much. I came downstairs. Dana was still in the living room. She watched me move through the hallway with an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not quite achieving it. Underneath the neutrality was something else. Satisfaction is not precisely the right word. More like relief, the particular relief of someone who has been waiting for a specific outcome and is watching it arrive. I did not look at her for long. I went outside. I sat on the curb. The door stayed open behind me. And I waited, in the specific quality of waiting that is not passive but analytical, for the shape of the situation to become clearer than it was. The black car arrived 23 minutes into that waiting. Gerald stepped out. He was dressed in the way he dressed for professional meetings, not for travel. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had expected to find me in that specific place at that specific time. He held up a single page. He said my name. Then he said, "Do you know this name?" The name on the document was one I recognized, not from family conversation. From a professional context, the kind that comes back to you with full clarity the moment the relevant trigger appears. Behind me, I heard my mother's breath change. The door framed her in the opening, and Dana had appeared beside her, and the sound that replaced Dana's careful silence was the sound of someone whose next move had just become considerably less certain than it had been 30 seconds earlier. Gerald was looking at me. I was looking at the name. And I understood, in the way I understand things that present in documents rather than in words, that the 11 minutes and the 2 bags and the coordinated architecture of my removal from that house had not been about anything as simple as family conflict. It had been about a name on a page. And whoever had decided I needed to be outside when this moment arrived had made a significant miscalculation, because the name on that document was not unfamiliar to me, and unfamiliarity was the only condition under which their plan worked. Gerald said, "Get in the car." Not urgently, not with the tone of someone managing a crisis, with the quiet direction of someone who has thought carefully about the sequence of what needs to happen and has determined that the car is the right place for the next part of it. I picked up one of my bags. He took the other without being asked. We got in. The driver, someone I didn't recognize, professional, eyes forward, pulled away from the curb before Gerald had fully settled into his seat. That detail, the pulling away before settling, the kind of choreography that exists when a sequence has been planned in enough detail that every person in it knows their mark without being told in the moment. I looked back once as we pulled away. My mother was still in the doorway. Dana had moved to stand beside her. The two of them watched the car from the frame of the open door, and neither of them moved, and neither of them called out, and the stillness of that image was the most information-dense thing I had seen all day. They had not expected the car. That was the thing the stillness confirmed. Whatever they had planned for the morning, whatever the 11-minute removal had been designed to produce, a black car arriving 23 minutes later and leaving with me in it was not part of the design. Gerald was looking at his phone, not dismissively, working. Reading something with the focused attention of someone reviewing a document they need to have current before a conversation begins. I waited. He put the phone down after about 4 minutes of driving. He said, "How much do you know about your grandfather's trust?" Not my mother's father. His first wife's father, a man named Edmund Calloway, who had died 6 years ago at 84, and whose name I knew from 2 contexts. The first was family reference, the occasional mention at the periphery of conversations about Gerald's history before my mother. The second was professional. That was the name on the document, Edmund Calloway. I had encountered that name 18 months ago in a filing I had reviewed during a routine audit engagement that had touched, at one edge, a holding structure connected to a real estate trust. The connection had been peripheral to the work I was doing, and I had noted it and moved on. I had filed the name correctly. I told Gerald this. He listened without interrupting, which was a quality I had always respected in him. He let information arrive in full before he responded to it. Then he said, "Then you understand more about what I'm about to show you than your mother believes you do." He opened the folder he had brought from the car's document pocket. He placed a single page on the seat between us. The Edmund Calloway Family Trust had been established in 1987. Gerald had been married to Edmund's daughter Caroline for 11 years before Caroline died. The trust had been structured, at Edmund's direction, with a series of conditional provisions that reflected his particular and documented suspicion that family assets had a tendency to migrate toward the path of least legal resistance rather than the path of most moral appropriateness. Edmund had been a careful man. The trust reflected that. The primary asset was a property portfolio held in the trust structure, generating income that had been managed through a series of nested entities for 20 years. The income was substantial. The portfolio had appreciated in ways that a 1987 valuation would not have predicted. Gerald had been named a trustee at Edmund's death, not as a beneficiary, but as an administrator with specific fiduciary obligations that could not be dissolved by remarriage or by the passage of time. I read the relevant sections of the trust document Gerald placed in front of me. I read them twice. Then I found the provision that explained the 11 minutes and the 2 bags and the name on the page. The trust contained what is called a displacement provision. It is not common. Edmund's attorney had apparently been a precise and somewhat paranoid man who had built into the document a mechanism designed to protect named individuals from being maneuvered out of their proximity to trust assets through social or domestic pressure. The provision stated that if a named individual was involuntarily displaced from a primary household address associated with a trust-linked beneficiary structure within a specific geographic radius of trust-held property, the displacement event would trigger a formal review of the beneficiary designations and potentially activate a transfer of administrative control. The named individual in the displacement provision was me. I looked up from the document. Gerald was watching me read with the expression of someone who has been waiting for the moment of recognition and is now observing it arrive. I said, "How long has my name been in this document?" He said, "Since Edmund amended it 8 years ago, 4 years before he died." 8 years ago, I was 23. I had met Gerald once at that point, briefly, at a dinner my mother had organized when she and Gerald were still in the early stage of their relationship. I had been in college. I had been unremarkable in that meeting by any measure. I said, "Why?" Gerald said, "Because Edmund did due diligence on everyone connected to anyone he was connected to. He was that kind of man. He looked at you and he saw something he considered worth protecting." I said, "He didn't know me." Gerald said, "He knew what you were studying. He knew your academic record. He knew you were pursuing forensic accounting. He told me at one point that the most valuable thing a trust can have is a beneficiary who understands documents." A pause. "He put your name in as a secondary administrative beneficiary with a dormant interest. The interest would only become active under specific conditions." I said, "The displacement provision." Gerald said, "Yes." I looked back at the document. The specific conditions required that the displacement be involuntary, documented, and witnessed. Involuntary was satisfied by my mother's instruction and my compliance without argument. Documented was satisfied by the fact that I had left with bags in the middle of the day from a household in which I was a registered temporary resident. Witnessed was satisfied by the presence of a third party who could attest to the circumstances. The driver. I looked at the back of the driver's head. Gerald said, "He's a process server. He's been with us since 8 this morning." The car had not arrived by coincidence. Gerald had known the removal was coming. He had positioned a witness. He had arrived at the precise moment when the conditions of the displacement provision had been met and could be documented in the presence of someone qualified to attest to them. I said, "You knew they were going to do this." Gerald said, "I suspected. When I saw the documents they had been trying to access, I understood what they were attempting. Your mother and Dana had found a reference to your name in the trust through a filing that came through the estate attorney's office. They didn't have the full document. They had enough to understand that your presence in the household was connected to something they didn't want connected." I said, "They thought removing me would solve the problem." Gerald said, "They thought if you were out of the household before anyone made the connection officially, the displacement provision would be unactivatable. They didn't understand the full mechanics." I said, "Because they didn't have the full document." Gerald said, "Because they had a fragment. And fragments are dangerous exactly because they give you enough to act on without enough to act correctly." We drove for another 20 minutes. Gerald walked me through the structure in the methodical way of someone who has been sitting with this information for longer than the morning and wants to make sure it transfers correctly. The trust held 4 properties, 3 in the metropolitan area, 1 at a distance. The combined current value was significantly larger than the 1987 base. The income generated annually was a number that required me to read it twice, not because I couldn't process it, but because I wanted to be certain I was reading the document correctly rather than projecting onto it. I was reading it correctly. Gerald said, "Your mother has been a co-signatory on 2 of the management accounts, not a beneficiary. A co-signatory, which means she has had operational access without ownership interest. She has been withdrawing from those accounts at a rate that exceeds the operational mandate of the co-signatory agreement." I said, "For how long?" Gerald said, 14 months. I said, "Does she know you know?" Gerald said, "She knows I have been reviewing the accounts. She does not know the full extent of what the review has found. The folder you saw on the dining room table on your second day, that was the preliminary audit summary. It disappeared because she took it, which told me she understood what it contained. The folder on the table, gone by afternoon. I had noted it without knowing what it was. Now I understood what the noting had been worth." Gerald said, "When they found the fragment of the trust document referencing your name, they made the decision to remove you. They believed that if you were out of the household before the displacement provision could be formally invoked, the administrative transfer would not occur." I said, "They were wrong." Gerald said, "The provision triggers on the documented displacement event, not on the invocation. The trigger happened on the curb. The process server witnessed it. The documentation is complete." I sat with that. The curb, my 2 bags, the 11 minutes, the car that arrived 23 minutes later. All of it had been, from the moment my mother said, "Pack your things," a documented legal event with consequences that neither she nor Dana had understood they were creating. They had tried to remove a variable. They had activated a mechanism. I said, "What happens now?" Gerald said, "Now the trust attorney files the displacement documentation. The administrative transfer review opens formally. Your co-administrative interest activates, and the account access your mother has been using gets frozen pending the audit completion." I looked at the document in my hands. My name in Edmund Calloway's trust, placed there by a man who had met me once and seen something worth protecting and had built a structure precise enough that it could survive the specific kind of pressure my mother and sister had applied to it. I thought about Dana's laugh through the open door, about my mother's 7 words and the rehearsed steadiness of her eye contact, about the folder gone by afternoon, about a garage door opening at 11:41 on a Tuesday night. All of it connected now, visible as a single structure rather than a collection of individual details. Gerald said, "There's one more thing you need to understand before we go back." I looked at him. He said, "The trust document has a provision I haven't shown you yet. It's in the section that governs what happens to the co-signatory access when the displacement provision is activated." He turned to a page near the back of the folder. He placed it on the seat between us. I read it. I read it again. And I understood that what I was holding was not just the explanation of everything that had happened in the past 3 weeks. It was the explanation of why everything that was about to happen next was going to unfold the way it was, and why my mother, when she finally saw this page, was going to understand that the 11 minutes had not been the efficient removal of a problem. They had been the precise and documented creation of one that now had my name on it, and not in the way she had intended. We drove back to the house 2 hours later, not immediately. Gerald needed those 2 hours, and so did I, though for different reasons. He needed them to make 2 calls, one to the trust attorney, a woman named Patricia Aldred, who spoke with the compressed precision of someone billing by 6-minute increments and wasting none of them, and one to the financial institution holding the co-signatory accounts, which resulted in a hold being placed that would prevent any further withdrawals pending the formal audit review. I needed them to sit with the full structure of what I was holding before I was in a room with the people who had built it without understanding what they were building. The document Gerald had shown me near the end of our drive contained a provision I want to describe carefully because the precision of it matters. When the displacement provision was activated, the co-signatory access held by any household member who had participated in or facilitated the displacement was subject to immediate suspension pending a conduct review. The suspension was not discretionary. It was automatic. It had been written into the trust by Edmund Calloway with the specific and documented intention of ensuring that anyone who attempted to use domestic pressure to manipulate the trust structure would find that the attempt had the opposite of its intended effect. Edmund had anticipated exactly this. He had built the counter mechanism into the original document in 1987 and had refined it in the amendment 8 years ago when he added my name. He had seen this coming decades before it arrived. That was the thing I sat with during those 2 hours. Not anger at my mother, not satisfaction at the reversal, just the quiet recognition of a man I had never known well who had understood, with the precise structural mind of someone who had spent a lifetime building things meant to last, that the people most likely to threaten what he had built were the people closest to it, and who had designed accordingly. Gerald parked in the driveway this time, not at the curb. The driveway. The change in position was not accidental, and I noted it without comment. Patricia Aldred had emailed the formal documentation to Gerald's phone during the drive, the displacement certification, the account hold confirmation, the notice of administrative transfer review, everything printed and organized in the folder Gerald carried when we walked to the front door. He did not knock. He had a key. My mother was in the kitchen. Dana was at the table. The two of them had the specific arrangement of people who have been waiting in a room for longer than is comfortable and have stopped being able to maintain the pretense of casual occupation. There was a cup of coffee in front of each of them that appeared to be there for the purpose of having something to hold rather than for drinking. They looked at Gerald, then at me, then at the folder. Gerald set the folder on the table. He did not open it immediately. He sat down in the chair at the head of the table, the chair that had always been his, and he folded his hands and he looked at my mother with the specific expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a long patience. I sat across from Dana. I did not look at her with anger. I looked at her with the neutral attention of someone in a professional setting who is observing the behavior of a party to a situation and wants an accurate record of what that behavior is. Dana looked at the folder. Gerald said, "I'm going to explain what's in here. I need both of you to listen without interrupting because what I'm about to describe is a legal situation and the accuracy of your understanding of it matters for the decisions you'll need to make after." My mother said, "Gerald?" He said her name once, quietly. She stopped. He walked through it in the order that produced the clearest understanding. The trust structure first, its history, its purpose, Edmund's intentions. He described Edmund with the specific and private knowledge of a man who had been his son-in-law for 11 years and had understood him clearly. Edmund had built things to last. He had trusted no one uncritically. He had documented everything. Then the displacement provision. Gerald read the relevant section directly from the document rather than paraphrasing it. Reading it directly was the right choice. Paraphrase allows interpretation. The document allowed none. My mother's expression changed when she heard the provision read aloud, not dramatically. The particular change of someone hearing the exact words of a thing they had only understood approximately, and discovering that the approximate understanding had been significantly incomplete. Then the amendment, the section that added my name. Gerald placed the page on the table and pointed to the date and to my name and said nothing for a moment, letting the document speak for itself the way documents speak best, which is in silence. Dana looked at my name on the page. She looked at it for a long time. Then Gerald placed the co-signatory suspension notice on the table. He explained the automatic mechanism, the conduct review, the account hold. He explained it without inflection, without any emotional register that would allow the information to be framed as an attack or a threat rather than what it was, which was a documented legal consequence of a documented action. My mother said, "I didn't know about the provision." Gerald said, "I know." She said, "If I had known," Gerald said, "you would have made a different decision. I understand that. The provision was designed for a situation where the people triggering it didn't know it existed." The room was quiet. Dana said, "What does the conduct review mean?" Gerald said, "It means the 14 months of withdrawals from the co-signatory accounts are reviewed against the operational mandate of the co-signatory agreement. Anything outside that mandate is subject to recovery." Dana said, "Recovery?" Gerald said, "The trust recovers the funds through whatever legal mechanism is necessary." Dana looked at her coffee cup. My mother looked at the folder. Neither of them looked at me. I want to describe what that silence felt like because I think it is the most important part of the story and the part most difficult to convey accurately. It was not triumphant. I want to be honest about that. There is a version of this moment that people imagine when they think about a situation resolving in the direction of fairness after a long time of it not doing so, and that version involves something that feels like victory, a warm, satisfying recognition that the correct thing has finally happened. What I felt was quieter than that. It was more like standing at the end of a long calculation and confirming that the result is what the work predicted. Correct. Complete. Without the additional emotion that people attach to correctness when they have been hoping for it. My mother had made decisions from inside a limited understanding of the structure she was operating within. She had seen a fragment and acted on it. The action had activated the full structure, which was larger and more precisely designed than the fragment had suggested. She had not intended to harm me, in the sense that harm had not been the goal. Control had been the goal. The removal of a variable that threatened a plan. Harm had been incidental to that goal, which is its own category of moral failure, but a different one than malice. I had decided during the 2 hours in the car what I wanted from the moment we were now in. Not punishment, not the extended process of a family legal battle that would cost more than it produced and leave everyone in it diminished. Correction. The same thing I had wanted in every situation I have worked on professionally, just the record made accurate, just the truth given the standing it was owed. I said one thing in that kitchen. I had been quiet through Gerald's presentation. Deliberately. This was his matter as much as mine, and the information was his to present. When he finished, I looked at my mother and I said, "I didn't know about the trust until today. I didn't come back to this house to trigger anything or to produce this outcome. I came because Gerald asked me to, and because I thought you should hear this from both of us together, rather than from a legal notice." My mother looked at me. She said, "I know." She said it in the specific way of someone who has been operating on one version of a situation and has just been handed the complete version and is experiencing the particular difficulty of integrating them. I said, "I'm not going to live here. I'm not asking for anything from this house. The trust matter is Gerald's and Patricia's to manage. I'm not involved in that beyond what Edmund put in the document." She said nothing. Dana said nothing. I stood up. I picked up my bag from where Gerald had set it by the door. I walked out of the kitchen. I went through the front door and I stood on the front step, the same front step I had left 40 minutes before the black car arrived, and I looked at the street and the afternoon light, which was doing the same sideways November thing it had been doing before, and I stood there for a moment in the quiet of having said the true thing and being done. Gerald came out a few minutes later. He said Patricia would handle the formal process. He said the account hold would remain until the review was complete. He said he was sorry for how the day had unfolded. I told him the day had unfolded the way it needed to. He nodded. I got into a car, I called for myself, and I left. So here is what happened, plainly told. I was told to pack my things, and I did it without argument. I sat on a curb with 2 bags for 23 minutes. A black car arrived, and a man I respected handed me a document with my name on it. I spent 2 hours understanding what the name meant and why it was there. I went back to the house and I sat at a table while the truth was placed in front of the people who had triggered it by trying to remove me from the vicinity of it. And then I stood on the front step and I left. I did not fight. I did not accuse. I did not produce the confrontation that the situation seemed to be building toward. I just stayed calm long enough for the structure to reveal itself. Now here is what I want to leave you with. The people who tried to remove me had a fragment of information and they acted on it quickly with coordination because speed felt like advantage. What they did not understand was that the structure they were trying to outmaneuver had been built by someone who had anticipated exactly that kind of speed and had designed the counter mechanism accordingly. There is a lesson in that about patience, about the difference between moving fast on incomplete information and moving correctly on complete information. Speed feels like power. Completeness is power. The second thing, Edmund Calloway put my name in a legal document based on one dinner and a transcript and the particular way I was pursuing my education. He saw something in me that he considered worth protecting before I had done anything to demonstrate it. He did not tell me, he just built the structure. That is the quietest form of confidence another person can have in you. Not expressed, just built, just designed into something that was meant to last. If someone has ever built something around your potential without telling you they were doing it, a recommendation, an opportunity, a structure, a door left open, I want you to understand that the most honoring thing you can do with that is to be exactly what they saw. Not for them, for the clarity of it. I'm going to end today without a call to action in the traditional sense. Just this. If you were told, explicitly or implicitly, that you were not needed somewhere, and you left without argument because you understood that argument would only feed what was already against you, and you have been sitting with that leaving and wondering if the quiet was the right choice. It was. The quiet was correct. The structure was waiting, it always is, for the people who were meant to find it. Tell me in the comments your first name and your city. Tell me if you have ever left somewhere without argument and found out later that the leaving was the thing that changed everything. I want to know who is at this table. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next one. There is always another story. I'll see you in the next one.